الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى صحبه أجمعين. Again, you should try and use the space up front, the sisters, because they'll come and take them if you don't. Then you won't have it anymore. Inshallah ta'ala, today I'm going to talk about al-haqiqi wal-majaz, what literal and metaphorical terms are. And then we're going to do a little bit of a recitation. Like I'm going to read a little bit through the matan because we're coming close towards the end of the semester and I haven't read much through the matan. So I'll read a little bit through it. You'll find out that everything, like the pages that we read, I've already explained in different sessions, so it's not that complicated. We'll read a little bit and then once we've kind of gone through that a little bit, next time I will kind of explain to you what we're going to be doing for the maybe 4 or 5. There's maybe 5 sessions after this ones that are left, or 6. And we're trying to kind of summarize what's left, inshallah, in terms of the course. There's a lot of, obviously, Usool al-Fiqh is a very, very, very deep discipline. It takes a long time to actually study the whole thing. My goal for this course is that you get a basic understanding of the terminology, of the nomenclature, of the basic aspects or the concepts of Usool al-Fiqh, so that if we, inshallah, I do a second level Usool al-Fiqh or third level, if you've built some interest, you built some understanding, then you can attend that. And at that point we can dive deeper a little bit within each madhab and within some of the aspects that we failed to kind of go through here. So are we coming any closer to starting with this? All right. So if you have it in front of you, I just want to use this for my own. Open to haqiqi. I don't know if you know which one that is. I don't want to waste time. It's already 8 something. So it's the 93rd slide in the slides, if you have the slides. Oh, there we go. I think we may have something going on there, but that's not the right one. But that's all right. All right. And if we have the flicker, because I want to go back and forth. So let's talk about haqiqi first. So if you remember, I said there are 4. Sheikh Wahabi, Allah rahmahu, Dr. Wahabi Zuhaili, what he did was he divided the way words are used to indicate meanings to 4 categories. This is the best categorization that exists, wallahu alam, within this discipline. It's very well done, and I use it usually to. Okay, here we go. So again, the indication of words based on the manner in which the word is used to indicate its meaning. So the manner that it's going to be used is either going to be literal, figurative, direct, or metaphorical. Haqiqi, majazi, sarih, and kinaya. I'm not going to talk about sarih and kinaya in this course. I'm just going to talk about haqiqi and majaz through the next 2 slides, inshallah, so you have an idea of what they mean. So haqiqi is or literal. What is used in the sense for which it was coined, or according to some, what is used according to the convention or norm of society. So if I say the word asad or lion, then what I mean by that is the animal, because that word was coined for that. That's the norm of society. That's what the word is used for. And when we talk about the different types of literal usages, it's either based on language, based on sharia, general custom word, or a specific custom word. So the based on language, like example of just a lion, then what comes to mind is the image of a certain animal, tree, all that stuff is kind of. Just a certain thing comes to mind because that's the language usage of it. Shar'i, so based on sharia. When you say the word salah, the word salah, the literal meaning of it is what we just did, even though the language-based norm of it is not. The word salah in the language-based norm is an act of supplication. That's what it is. If you were to go back to the Arabic language and to its origins, if you go back to the Jahili usage, the word salah would mean a chant, a prayer, which is what we use today in English. A prayer, it's a chant. You're talking to God. But because the literal usage now is no longer the language one, the literal usage is based on the Sharia, right? So so it's no longer metaphorical. Salah, referring to Isha and Maghrib, is no longer a metaphorical use. It's a literal use because it's based on Sharia, and based on a general custom word, urfiya amma, like the word dabba. When you say the word dabba, in language, the word dabba has everything yadubbu ala al-ard, everything that walks on the planet. So every living thing. So I am a dabba. But saying that, you're like, you think it's funny because that's not the right usage. Because in your mind, the literal usage for dabba, there's a general custom word and it means an animal. That's not a human being, right? So linguistically speaking, it's not weird for me to call myself a dabba, but from a general custom word perspective, it is. So which one wins? Whatever is more famous, whatever comes to mind. So the urf, the haqiqi, the literal usage of word dabba is not based on language, it's based on the general custom usage for it. Does that make sense? So it's knowing that literal meanings don't only come from one source. So I say the word literal, it doesn't mean whatever the language says. No, it's not only just the language says. It could be what the Sharia says. It could be what the general custom usage. It could be the specific custom usage, like the word dhamma. So if you're studying grammar and you see the word dhamma, do you think a hug? No, you think the thing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So within a discipline, there's also a literal usage and a metaphorical usage. Generally speaking, the word dhamma means a hug. It can mean that little haraka that you use within Arabic language. But if you're studying grammar, so you're in a specific discipline, the literal usage is the haraka. It's not going to be the hug. Understand? So there's a specific custom use. Again, these are the different. There's more categories for literal. I just want to explain to you like how this works. So the literal use of a word is important. Understanding its background. So now you can figure out that when you're reading the Quran, you have to know what was meant by these words. You have to know what this word, when this word was used, what was meant by it. Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what was the literal meaning of it at the time? Because the literal meaning of the time may be different than the literal meaning for it today. And that's why it's important to know the language, because it's not always exactly the same. All right? So هل خرج المعنى اللغوي بالوضع الشرعي? So does a religious term lose its linguistic meaning? Right? Does a religious term lose its linguistic meaning? Meaning, when I say salah, for example, does that mean it has nothing to do with its linguistic meaning? Because what's the linguistic meaning? The linguistic meaning is a chant, is in terms of a prayer that you have with Allah, some form of supplication. So now that it has a new literal meaning, which is the act of Maghrib, Isha, Dhuhr, Asr, Qiyam al-Layl, Sunnat al-Masjid, whatever, using that term, does it mean that it's no longer attached to its linguistic meaning? So the Jamhur say no. Rather, it is contained within it. Meaning the linguistic meaning is still contained within the literal usage of the word. In fact, once we stop the linguistic connection, we lose the religious term itself. So once you cut off the linguistic meaning, the religious term almost becomes meaningless. Like the religious term loses its essence when you don't have that piece. So the moment you stop understanding salah as a prayer, as a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the linguistic meaning, the religious term that comes to mind actually becomes empty. So you can't say it's substituting it. No, it is still, the linguistic meaning is still contained within the shar'i meaning, right? The linguistic meaning. And if you think about it, it works for all of them. The linguistic meaning is always contained in the Sharia-based term or the general custom word or the specific custom word. It's contained within it. It's not lost. It's just because of how we speak and how we live, we end up assigning meanings to specific words in specific ways. All right, and literal is easy. It's a simple thing. There's way more to talk about, but I'm just gonna make it very simple. It's just using a word and meaning with it whatever comes to mind immediately, based on your understanding of language, but not based on your understanding of language and custom and sharia today, but based on it at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So for you to be a mufassir, for you to be an usuli, for you to be a faqih, you have to not only understand the language, you also have to understand it the way it was understood the time of the Prophet ﷺ was alive. If you try to understand it outside of that, then you're not going to do very well, because the literal meanings will sometimes follow general custom implications, which is different today than it was, back then. وَجَاءَتْ سَيَّارَةٌ فَأَرْسَلُوا وَارِدَهُمْ فَأَدْلَىٰ دَلْوَهُ. When a car drove up to the well that Yusuf was in? No, it wasn't a car. There was no cars. Sayyaratun was any caravan that would contain people who were Bedouins, who kept on moving. People who were always moving. Sayyara, they never stopped. Nomads, they didn't stop. So, and that's the usage of the term back then. Kathiru sayr, they're always walking. Today, we use it as I say the word sayyara, you're not thinking of a nomad, you're not thinking of a Bedouin, you're thinking about a car. Why? Because the general custom word is changing. So in the Quran, that's important. I remember this question, I gave that example because I had a student back in Syria who wanted to show me how the Quran proved and talked about cars before it was time for it. I thought it was really cute because he was grade 3, but I had to explain to him that no, sayyara here is not, that's in a car. It's actually a whole different thing. It was hilarious because I broke his heart. He was so happy that he found cars in the Quran. Then I had to tell him that's not what is meant by what is meant by it. But again, you just find these little things. Understand that it's important to understand these words and what uses they have. All right. So figurative, which is, so you have literal meanings, haqiqi, and then you have figurative. So this is important, and this is a huge mabhath. It's a very large chapter within this discipline, very, very large, as in a full course large. But I'm just going to give you some basic understandings, and then you can think about this a little bit. So what is deviated from its literal meaning? Anything that is deviated from its literal meaning is going to be called majaz in Arabic, is going to be called the figurative usage of the word. So how we move from the literal to the figurative, there are a number of ways. Here are the two major ways of doing it, and I think it's worth taking a moment and thinking about it. There has to be an adjusting evidence to morph it away from its literal meaning. So there has to be a qarina. There has to be a reason for us to move it from one place to the other. Or else it's problematic if we just jump to the figurative without one every single time we want to. Meaning there has to be a methodology. As in all aspects of Islam, you can't make choices just based on whim. You have to make choices based on a methodology. So if you're going to, every word that is in the Quran has its literal meaning. What do we go to? We always stick to the literal meaning. If we're going to go from the literal to the metaphorical or the figurative, the same thing, sarih and kinaya, which is they're a little bit different because they don't come in the form of words specifically, but they come in the form of terms being used, like طلقتك or ilhaqi bi ahliki. These are two different. طلقتك, I divorce you. ilhaqi bi ahli, go to your parents. Are they the same? It depends on the intention. So there's different sarih and kinaya. But literal and figurative, you always stick to the literal. If you're going to the figurative, there has to be a reason for why you left the literal and came to the figurative. There has to be some adjusting evidence that allowed that. Or بعلاقة مخصوصة بين اللفظ والمعنى. Or there has to be a specific connection between the word and the meaning itself. There has to be a very clear connection between the word and the meaning that you're using in order for you to go from one to the other. And these are just two examples in general. The same thing, I'll give you when you say the word lion, in the literal meaning is the animal. If you're describing a person, right? So there's now a specific connection between the word and the meaning. Then you understand that lions are technically known to be brave or strong or ferocious. Then you understand that this is what the person is being described as, because it doesn't work any other way, right? So this is an example. So it's like some names have become descriptions, right? Hamza, it's no longer even a name, it's a description of someone who was extremely brave and powerful and strong, because of the fact, so the literal meaning is just a regular name, and the figurative meaning is actually the description of the person who once carried it. So again, these little connections are important. So that all this doesn't really matter to you, because unless you're going to become unless you're going to specialize in linguistics or in nahu, sarf and balagh and badi' and ma'ani and all that stuff, what you need to know is does it exist in the Quran and the Hadith? Does majaz exist in the Quran and Hadith? So everyone said yes, except 4 basic groups. Abu Ishaq Isfaraini, and he's a very important figure. Had this been a second or third level Usool Fiqh study, I would have talked about him a little bit, because he's a really important Islamic scholar who added a lot to Usool al-Fiqh, even though he didn't really do much work outside of it. But in Usool al-Fiqh he did a lot, and a lot of his work is what was built on later on. So he contributed meaningfully to this discipline for sure. But he did have some opinions that kind of stand out a little bit as kind of outliers. He claimed that the actual word's meaning changed and became the literal. So he didn't really say there's no majaz. He just kind of redefined literal and figurative. He said, no, the figurative meaning now is the literal meaning for this word. You remember how we just pointed out a second ago that the literal meaning can be based on other stuff? It can be based on custom. So he would just claim that this word, the literal meaning for it now, based on Sharia, is this. So he would kind of just make that claim, even though that claim is not something that you can make as a person. That is made by a society. So it's the society that kind of determines that, not really the person. Sharia can determine certain things, but we also have to have good evidence that the Sharia actually determined that this word has this meaning now. So we don't have a lot of examples for that, unfortunately, within the deen. Obviously, salah, siyam, hajj, all these are words that have literal meanings. The word hajj means to go from one place to the other to perform a pilgrimage. Islamically, it's go to Mecca in a certain time of the year. So the literal meaning now is the Shara'i-based meaning. So he would just claim that the meaning changed and became, the figurative meaning is now the literal meaning, meaning it's changed societally, and that's how it's understood. And of course, there's a lot of answers to that claim. But basically, he doesn't really get rid of the figure of speech. Dawood al-Zahiri, so it's not Ibn Hazm, it's his teacher Dawood al-Zahiri. He technically did. He technically basically removed the figure of speech. So I'll give you an example, just so you can maybe I get this example before here, maybe I haven't. It's a simple one. It's a nice, clear one. So for him, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a bikr is going to get married, وَرِضَاهَا صَمْتُهَا, right? Her acceptance is being quiet. So if she says yes for Dawood al-Zahiri, it doesn't count. She has to be quiet. Understand? Yes, to that degree. Yes, to that degree, Dawood al-Zahiri was like it's literal. Everything that is said is literal, which is impossible. You can't understand scripture that way. You have to have some ability to move to the figurative. His student Ibn Hazm was similar to him, Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri as he's called, but he was a much more modified version than his teacher was. But Dawood al-Zahiri was very literal. It's exquisite to study his work because I don't understand. It's insane. Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, there are claims, and I only put them there because there are a lot of claims that they said that. And when you study their work, it's hard to verify those claims. I don't think it's correct. And I'm not here actually to defend them. I'm just saying that this claim that they said there's no majaz in Quran and Hadith, both of them, is not an accurate claim. Again, they did something similar to what Abu Ishaq al-Isfirayini did. They refused the idea that a word, you move from one meaning to the word to the other. They just looked at it as in what is the more appropriate meaning within this context. That's the literal meaning. So it's not that they denied the existence of the figurative. They just didn't accept this framework that I'm putting up here. It's a little bit complicated. But I just put it up there because this is not like, you'll find claims that these two said no to, especially those who don't like them. And I don't really care. For scholars, I respect them all, and I don't really have affinity to any of them. It doesn't make a difference to me. But I don't like made up. I don't like claims that are made up, even if the person that the claim is made against I don't necessarily like. I don't think it's appropriate for us, if you don't like someone, just make up claims. It's not true that they don't accept majaz or figure of speech in Quran and Hadith. It's just that they have a different approach to it altogether, and it's a little bit more complicated. But so I don't want to waste your time. But just letting you know that that's there. You may run into that. Where does this become important? This becomes important if you attended my Aqeedah course. If you attended my Aqeedah course, you'll know why this is important. Because in my Aqeedah course, we talked about how there are 3 different approaches when it comes to Asma' wa Sifat, or some of the Sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you can call them Sifat. And the example here that is well known is this is probably the most famous one. So, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arshi istawa, right? And that fi'l, that action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Istawa in English is when you achieve a state of equilibrium with something. That's what istawa means. Or you're safely fastened on top of something, right? Istawait ala al-Arsh wa ala al-Kursi wa ala al-Istawait ala al-Ard. That's what istawa means. So when the scholars of Aqeedah talked about this concept, some of them affirmed the apparent meaning, the literal meaning, and said we have no idea how it happens. We exalt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from doing anything that's similar to the human being or to be physical in any way, but we don't know. We just know that that's what he said and we accept it. So they affirm the literal and they stay away from the hows or the mechanics or the explanation or the details. They just stay away from it and they refuse to talk about it, right? Which is one approach, and we talked about that. Another approach, the one that's more controversial, both of them are a little bit controversial, honestly. The second one is probably the easiest. You affirm the wording and just don't answer the question. But the figurative, which is ta'wil is basically just saying that this word here we're not going to accept it in its literal form. We're going to say istawa, we're going to explain it in its figurative form. We're going to go from the literal understanding of the word to the figurative understanding or meaning of the word. We're going to move from and istawa figuratively means to dominate. To dominate. And it makes it easy. You can say that about the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no problem at all. It doesn't really need any more. But to go from the literal, which is why this is important, to go from the literal to the figurative, you have to have a good reason for it, right? No, sorry. Ooh, what did I do? Where am I now? Allahu Akbar. I have no idea where I am. Yeah, sorry. Oops. All right. So you have to have either صرف الحقيقة بقرينة or you have to have علاقة مخصوصة. There has to be some adjusting evidence to do that. So those who accepted the figurative said that the qarina is the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be described in the same way human beings are described. That's the qarina, that's the adjusting evidence. That you can't describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as you would describe a human being. And of course there are counter arguments to that have validity, and it goes back and forth, which is why we have three approaches altogether, and which is why we don't fully agree on this. But I'm explaining to you where this becomes important. The usage of majaz in the Quran. There's a lot of it, obviously. There's a lot of examples where majaz is going to be used, where the figurative terms are going to be used. And if you attend to my tafsir, I talk about this quite a lot, and I don't want to be a broken record, so I'm not going to repeat it. So that's everything I want to tell you about extracting rules from text regarding indication of words. I'm not going to go through almost anything more than that, even though there's much more, but I'm going to stick with that. So let's go through a little bit of the text, just to kind of say that we recited a little bit of the text. So I don't think we recited much of the text. I think we stopped. We did this. Let's do this. All right. So I'll read if you're able to read along with me, just so you can see that we've covered all these things, and I'll point out maybe the stuff that we didn't. قال أقسام الكلام, so the different types of speech, and of course it's all translated in the slides after, so you're welcome to kind of just follow along in the translations. So speech is minimally composed of either فعل ما يتركب منه الكلام اسمان أو اسم أو أقل ما يتركب منه الكلام اسمان أو اسم وفعل أو اسم وحرف أو حرف وفعل. And of course they don't fully agree on every part of this, meaning it's either two nouns, a noun and a verb and a particle, or a noun and a particle. And of course some scholars of Nahu and Sarf will have an aneurysm if they read some of it, because they don't all agree on that, but that's how they look at it. والكلام ينقسم إلى أمر ونهي وخبر واستخبار وينقسم أيضا إلى تمن وعرض وقسم ومن وجه آخر ينقسم إلى حقيقة ومجاز. So let's kind of just read that for you here. So speech is classified into commands, prohibitions. We talked about commands and we talked about prohibitions. There are slides on both, and we talked about them last time. Declarative statements, khabar, and we will talk about akhbar soon, is coming as in a topic that we will cover. And questions, istikhbar, which is just speech is either you're commanding someone, you're prohibiting someone, you're giving them information, you're asking a question, wishes, you're wishing for something, suggestions, you're suggesting something, or oaths, you're making a qasam. And there's more divisions for speech, but these are the ones that are agreed upon by the scholars of linguistics. And from another perspective, it is classified into haqiqa, literal, and majaz, figurative, which we just talked about today. So he explains the literal. فقال فالحقيقة ما بقي في الاستعمال على موضوعه وقيل ما استعمل فيما اصطلح عليه من المخاطبة والمجاز ما تجوز عن موضوعه فالحقيقة إما لغوية وإما شرعية وإما عرفية والمجاز إما أن يكون بزيادة أو نقصان أو نقل أو استعارة فالمجاز بالزيادة مثل قوله تعالى ليس كمثله شيء والمجاز بالنقصان مثل قوله تعالى واسأل القرية والمجاز بالنقل كالغائط فيما يخرج من الإنسان والمجاز بالاستعارة كقوله تعالى جدارا يريد أن ينقض. So this is where we get a little bit more explanation on haqiqa and majaz from the text itself, and it's nice to kind of get something from the text outside of what I'm talking about. Literal means it is used in the sense for which it was coined according to some, that is used according to convention. On the other hand, something that is figurative when it's extended beyond its original coinage. So what type of haqiqa? There's lexical or linguistic, revelatory or customary. We talked about that at the examples that I had given you. A figurative use is either figurative by addition, meaning where it's a surplus, you're doing something, you're adding a piece. Figurative by subtraction, you're taking something away. Figurative of lexical shift, and figurative of metaphor. So he gives some examples. So he says figurative by addition is like when he says subhanahu wa ta'ala, laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing whatever like unto him. So instead of saying laysa mithlahu shay, qala laysa kamithlihi shay. And this is actually a little bit too complex for me to go through for you linguistically here today. So I'm going to leave it just because of the fact that you understand what it means. There's nothing that is similar to him. But linguistically in Arabic, لَيْسَ مِثْلَهُ شَيْء, nothing is like him. And لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْء is a little bit different. And it forces the word mithlihi to be understood in a figurative manner. But with your permission, I'm going to leave it at that for today, and we'll talk about this maybe. There will be a point where this becomes important, and I'll point it out. I want to leave it for the purpose of this study now. Figurative by subtraction, like him saying, وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةِ, ask the village. How do you ask a village? You're going to ask the people of the village, or someone from the village. So instead of saying وَاسْأَلْ أهل القرية أو واسأل أحدا من القرية, he said واسأل القرية, ask the village. So figuratively, obviously, you can't ask a village. If you stood in front of a village and asked forever, you'll never get an answer. So it has to be understood figuratively, or else it's impossible for it to mean anything. Figurative by lexical shift. Like غائط with respect to human excrement, hollow being used for what comes out of a person. So الغائط is a word that is used to describe feces, but the way the word غائط is something that refers to something that is hollow. It's coming from something that is hollow within the human being. So it's a little bit of a lexical move. Instead of calling what we have غائط, we call what's coming out. So it's like you're describing, instead of describing the source with it, you're describing the product with it, and that's again a form of figurative speech. Again, figurative speech is a very large bahth. And figurative by metaphor. Like he's the most, like when he says subhanahu wa ta'ala, جِدَارًا يُرِيدُ أَن يَنْقَضَّ, a wall that wants to collapse. No wall wants to collapse, obviously, because walls don't want anything. But figuratively, what it means is that the wall is about to collapse. It looks almost like it wants to do it when that's not the case. So it's a figure of speech. Again, by metaphor, by using a phrase. You can see when he said the word metaphor, which is kinaya, it's a full phrase. It's not a word. It's a description. جِدَارًا يُرِيدُ أَن يَنْقَضَّ, which is, and again, if you're doing the mandatory reading, all of this is explained in the mandatory reading really easily. Like he explains all of this and he gives examples for it. So if you're not, I can tell by your expressions if you're not reading the book, because if you're not understanding this because you haven't read it yet. The book explains it really simplistically. I'm actually making it much more complex than it needs to be. So use the book. And the reason I didn't want to use the book for the study itself, like I could have just taken the book and just basically photocopied it and put it up for here, and we can just use the book, is because I want to take more time and just talk about the stuff that I think are important. And the book is pretty much self-explanatory in terms of your ability to read, especially if you're keeping up with what we're talking about here. All right, and then we went through the 4 ways of words, indications of words. So based on the type of word assigned, and we had khas, am, mushtarak, and mu'awwal. Based on the manner in which it's used, literal, figurative, direct, and metaphorical. Based on the clarity of the indication, so either clear or unclear. And under that you have mubayyan and zahir, which is a part of that category. And you have mujmal, a part of the other category. And the reason that I put those terms there as examples, because the Imam al-Haramayn al-Juwayni, in this text, he uses those terms. He points them out. Instead of using this categorization, he just talks about mujmal and mubayyan and zahir. He uses those terms, but they're part of this breakdown. And then based on how the meaning is indicated, it's either explicit indication or it's implicit indication. We'll leave those for another study, inshallah. I'm not going to go through them. So we talked about al-khas. We went through in all that. We talked about amr and nahi, commands and prohibitions. We talked about the general. We went through all that as well. I'm not going to do mushtarak and mu'awwal. I'm going to leave that for inshallah, a future study. So والأمر استدعاء الفعل بالقول ممن هو دونه على سبيل الوجوب وصيغته افعل وهي عند I didn't memorize this thing when I was a kid, and I can't read. Ya Latif, this is so bad. وهي عند الإطلاق والتجرد عن القرينة تحمل عليه إلا ما دل الدليل على أن المراد منه الندب أو الإباحة ولا يقتضي التكرار على الصحيح إلا ما دل الدليل على قصد التكرار ولا يقتضي الفور والأمر بإيجاد الفعل أمر به وبما لا يتم الفعل إلا به كالأمر بالصلاة أمر بالطهارة المؤدية إليها وإذا فعل يخرج المأمور عن العهدة. So let me explain those for you. So a command is a verbal demand obligating an inferior. The verbal command indicates in the form of if'al, the imperative. And I explained that when I talked about commands. So all this has been talked about. This is just a very simplistic explanation. When unqualified, and in the absence of contextual indications to the contrary, is interpreted as an obligation, except when some evidence indicates the recommendation, permission, in which case it's interpreted accordingly. So the word if'al becomes obligatory from Allah unless you have some adjusting evidence to say that this is recommended, is permissible, or is something completely different. We talked about all those things before. The correct view is that the command does not require repetition, and I talked about that specifically. Giving a command, does that mean you have to do it repetitively or not? And we talked about what the different scholars said about that. For the Shafi'iyya, he says that it does not require repetitiveness. You have to have a separate command saying you need to do it all the time in order for it to be repetitive. Unless some evidence indicates the repetition was intended, nor does it require immediate action. Again, like the Hanafiya say it has to be immediate. For the Shafi'i, you have muwassa, you have time. It doesn't have to be immediate, and that's of course a philosophical difference of opinion on this topic. The command to bring out an action is a command to perform both the act and whatever is required for the completion of the act. Just as command to perform prayers is a command enjoining the purity that paves the way for them. When the command act is performed, the one who is commanded is considered to have discharged his responsibility. So if you're commanded to salli, then implicitly you are commanded to perform wudu because you need wudu. ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. And I talked about that in the concept of wujub. We went through that in some degree of detail. All right, so I'll continue. I won't go back to the Arabic. I don't think anyone's really following along the Arabic. Those who are included in the audience of commands and prohibitions, and those who are not. So believers are included in those who Allah the Most High addresses, but those who forget the sahi, children, and the possessed majnoon are not included. And we talked about that in taklif. I went over that in the slides where I talked about religious responsibility, and we talked about who's excluded from religious responsibility. Disbelievers are addressed both by the details of the sacred law and by what they are not valid without. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُنْ مُصَلِّينَ, they responded, we are not those who prayed. So let me, just before we continue doing this, let me talk about this mas'ala. هل الكفار مخاطبون بفروع الشريعة? All right. So a non-Muslim, are they commanded to pray their 5 prayers or not? Is a non-Muslim required to pray all 5 prayers? Yeah, that's the question though. That's the question. I'm not expecting you to be able to answer this issue that the scholars have differed upon. I'm just explaining to you the concept. I want you to think about it in your own mind. Because you may say, well, I think they are, or they are not, or they have to go through a step process, or they're only asked to do one thing but not the rest of them. So it's the difference between do they have to pray, meaning they have to do whatever leads up to prayer, but they are responsible for every salah that they're missing, or they're just responsible to accept Islam, and this other stuff doesn't apply. So there's a difference of opinion on this matter, whether the disbelievers are being addressed by the detailed commands of Sharia. The major command of Sharia is La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. The details command, which is don't eat laham khanzir, don't perform zina, pray your 5 prayers. So are the kuffar disbelievers, are they included in these commands or only in the original command? So is a disbeliever addressed by secondary religious commands? So al-Jumhur, wal-Mu'tazila, wal-Asha'ira, wal-Iraqiyyin, al-Hanafiya, they all said yes. And حصول الشرط الشرعي ليس شرطا في التكليف. You are legally responsible to pray even if you don't have the condition of being Muslim. Then you're still responsible. Go get the condition of being Muslim so you can pray. That's your problem, but you're still responsible. And that's the majority of scholars' opinion. Jumhur al-Hanafiya, the majority of the Hanafiya, and Imam al-Isfaraini, and he offered this opinion. This is why I always bring him up, because he said no. حصول الشرط الشرعي شرط في التكليف. Meaning you're not legally responsible if you aren't Muslim. You need the religious condition in order for you to be religiously responsible. Yeah. Yeah, forgiven, but that doesn't mean they weren't commanded to do it initially. It can be forgiven, but it doesn't mean that they weren't commanded to do it initially. The issue, are they commanded to? This has implications in terms of, let me explain to you. So, Christians who eat pork, all right, they eat pork. So what does that mean? Are they not supposed to do it? So in the Bible, it doesn't explicitly say that they shouldn't. It implicitly says that it's not good for you, and it's not something that's recommended. But it doesn't explicitly say. I'll be honest, because I've looked at I've read the King James version and the Old Greek, and it doesn't explicitly say that. It does point out that boars are impure or they're filthy, but it doesn't talk about it's haram for them to eat. And again, you have to kind of accept the interpretations of their scholars within their faith. But is it wrong? So because if you say that they are commanded by the details of religious commands, then what you're saying is that it's haram for them to eat pork, and thus we cannot serve them that. We cannot be in their homes if they eat it. We cannot. But if you say that no, they're commanded to be Muslim, and within their faith it's fine for them to do so, so then we don't do it, but we don't, we let them do it, and if that's what they want to do, then they can go ahead and do that. They can have their farms within Islamic, for example, Islamic law. Can they have pig farms? Can they have their slaughtering of their pigs? Can they eat them? Understand the difference? This is where this actually becomes an issue. So because the Jamhur of the Hanafiya and Shaykh al-Isfaraini, a lot of modern scholars today, they don't see the kuffar being mukhatabin bi furu' al-sharia. They don't see disbelievers being addressed by secondary religious commands. They don't see that. I mean, they're on the second. They believe in the second answer, which is why when people ask me, is it okay if I work at a place that makes meat that's not halal or meat that is pork, can I serve that? I say yes, based on this comprehension of it, going back to the origins, because for them it's not haram. This is their shara. They're not mukhatabin bi furu' al-sharia tabana. But for them, alcohol is so that you don't serve that. Because alcohol is not only religiously in every religion seen to be something that is haram, but it's also medically proven to be something that is harmful, and the harms are explicitly apparent to people who are involved in. Yeah. Christian or not just Christian, in a country of a different background altogether. So meaning it's just a different religion. It doesn't matter, because alcohol is still within their understanding, which is the scientific world, something that is very harmful. So we follow even so someone drugs, for example. You can be atheist, you can be agnostic, you can be Martian, you can be, it doesn't matter where you're from. This is harmful. So you can't be a part of that. But for example, pork, within their faith, they don't. There are different. What's haram and halal in terms of meat is not exactly the same for what's haram and halal for us in terms of meat for us, right? So those discrepancies, this is where this becomes important. It kind of filters its way through how we view as minorities living in places where majorities behave in ways that are very different to us, and that aren't aligned with our values or aren't aligned with our halal and haram. So if they are commanded to, if they are responsibly religious for the secondary commands, then that's one thing. Then you wouldn't get involved in anything that went against the details of your faith, and you wouldn't participate. And if not, then you would be okay with it. Yeah.
Say that. So we're okay to serve them pork because in the religion it's not allowed.
Yeah.
But where does it, like, where can they say that, oh, you can serve them the pork but not the alcohol? For example,
because so the difference, because alcohol in their faith is not haram, is not halal. Like in their faith, it's also prohibited, and it's something that is not just prohibited within faiths. It's something that is recognized as harmful outside of faiths as well. But on the other hand, when we talk about pork, now I can explain why there's benefit in not eating it, but the Quran never talked about the actual reason for it. So I don't have a illah. Remember, I don't have a illah for that. I just have the prohibition, so I stick to the prohibition as it is. But since they don't have a prohibition, then that's something open for them to eat, and it's none of my business. They can do that. And if within the context that we're living in, that gives you, it doesn't give you the ability to start your pig farm and start slaughtering pigs and selling, but it gives you some flexibility if you're working within larger institutions or working in restaurants, stuff like that, to participate. Again, it just gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of participation and certain limitations, because of understanding a little bit whether they are included or not included in these secondary commands that exist. And it's a philosophical question. The Shafi'iyya in their initial answer was that they are, which is what Shaykh al-Juwayni basically pointed out here. His evidence is قالوا لم نكن من المصلين, because that's a part of Surah Al-Muddathir, right? And in the Surah Al-Muddathir, they call when they're asked why are you being punished, they say لم نكن من المصلين. We weren't amongst those who prayed. So he's using that as evidence to say, well, they were commanded to pray. Other scholars say no, what they mean is they weren't amongst those who prayed, which are the Muslims who were Muslims. So again, it's all about interpretation and how you understand things. But that's his argument and how he looks at things. A lot of modern scholars say they don't necessarily agree with that, and they're on this side here. Some people say مكلفون بالنواهي فقط. This is a very common, or this is a very popular opinion, meaning that disbelievers aren't included in secondary commands. They're included in secondary prohibitions. Prohibitions, not commands. If that makes any sense to you. Prohibitions as in it's haram to, يعني haram al-qatl, haram al-zina, haram al-shurb, haram. They're only included in prohibitions but not in commands. This is a long discussion. I don't want to get into it. I'm just giving you an idea, something to kind of think about for later. So a command is to do something, a command to do something is a prohibition against its opposite, and a prohibition against something is a command of its opposite. And on the slide, I have that phrase and I talked about it with you. الأمر بالشيء نهي عن ضده. Is that the case or is that not the case? And they've differed upon that as Muslim scholars historically. To prohibit means to verbally call someone who is below one to leave an action by the way of obligation. So that's the definition of what a prohibition is. It has to be a superior to inferior, telling them it has to be it's an obligation in terms of its form. It indicates the invalidity of what is being prohibited. The command form is sometimes used with the intention of ibaha. Sometimes a prohibition form can be used with the intention of offering permissibility, threat, equivalence, or existentation, takween, all of these things. If you just go to the book, you'll see the examples that are given. It'll make sense to you. Again, you have to have adjusting evidence of some sort. Adjusting evidence that takes the prohibition from taking the command of prohibition from being obligatory to follow to being recommended or just offering permissibility or just explaining the fact that two things are similar to each other. Like, فَاصْبِرُوا أَوْ لَا تَصْبِرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْكُمْ. Right? Show perseverance or don't show perseverance on the day of judgment. It makes no difference to you. But this is not a command or prohibition. This is taswiyah, saying it's the same thing. It's equivalent. It makes no difference. So you can look, if you want to know the example, just go to the book and you'll see the examples. They don't matter that much, to me at least. So here he talks about al-am wal-khas. Everything that we talked about, way more what's in the method in terms of explanation of what the specific and the general are. I'm not going to read them for you. You can go back and you can read them yourself, and if you find any difficulties, you can ask. I'll give you some Q&A. But this is much less in terms of what we talked about. We spent a lot of time in khas and am, so I went into a great deal of detail. All this here is much less detailed, and it's much easier to understand. But we're going to talk a little bit about al-mujmal wal-mubayyan a little bit here. So let me give you some examples. Go through this. This slide here is a little bit important. I want you to take a moment to kind of understand it. So ويجوز تخصيص الكتاب بالكتاب وتخصيص الكتاب بالسنة وتخصيص السنة بالكتاب وتخصيص السنة بالسنة وتخصيص النطق بالقياس ويعني بالنطق قول الله سبحانه وتعالى وقول الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. So generality and exclusions in Sharia sources. So again, khas and am, specific restricted terms and general terms. How can we apply restrictions and specificities to general terms? What is acceptable within the deen? So a Quranic utterance may be specified or excluded from the generality of another Quranic utterance. So the Quran can specify the Quran. The Quran can specify the Sunnah. The Sunnah can specify the Quran, and the Sunnah can specify the Sunnah. So all four are acceptable when we use the concept of specification, takhsis, meaning because it's not. This is not abrogation, and we're going to talk about abrogation in a couple of lessons. And abrogation is a huge issue that I'm going to take some time and make sure you understand, because this is not abrogation. This is just talking about specifying something. If there's a general term in the Quran or in the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, utterances, specifications that exist in the Quran and Sunnah can be applied to one another. That's actually very important. It's very, very important. It's actually one of the most important tool that a usuli and a faqih needs to have in order for them to make sense of what's being said. Because when you find differences, or you find wordings that seem to contradict each other, it's not contradiction, it's most of the time takhsis. This is a general concept, and here's a specific scenario within that general context. Either the Quran is showing the specific scenario, or the Prophet ﷺ through his words or through his actions is showing a specific scenario within it. And that's very important to understand in general, because it makes a huge difference in terms of how we look at things. And then you can also use qiyas. Analogy can be used to specify nutq, meaning specify revelation. So if you have revelation, you can always have analogy can actually specify certain aspects of revelation that usually is common sense. It's usually not really analogy or analogical deduction. Usually it's just common sense that's being used. So by utterance, we mean something that was said by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or by the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. So let's talk about clear mubayyan and unclear mujmal expressions. If you paid attention in the categorization I showed you, I told you that there is meaning specified or words that indicate meanings based on the clarity. That was one of the 4 categories. It's either clear indication or unclear indication. Under those 2 headlines or titles, we have these terms. These 2 titles, by the way, have at least 10 terms each under them, depending on whether you're going to study the Jumhur or the Hanafis, who have their own terminology altogether. May Allah forgive them. It's one of the longest things that you have to study in Usool al-Fiqh. And I used to love the Hanafis until I had to study that piece, and then I had a change of heart towards, because they just completely use different terminologies. It's very, very confusing when you compare it to the others in terms of their nomenclature. But I'm not going to go into it. I'm just going to use what the Imam al-Juwayni specifically, very simplistically put in his waraqat, where he said, an unclear, also called summarized or obscure speech or utterance, al-mujmal, is something that needs elaboration or explanation, needs bayan. It's a term that lacks clarity. It's a term that is just, it's vague, right? It's a vague term where it could mean different things. We need some clarity on what this means. Not that it has different meanings, we need to choose one. Just a meaning that is it requires someone to explain a little bit more what you mean by this term altogether. So this term can mean a variety of different things that aren't almost not even connected. And I need context or adjusting evidence to tell me what it is. Mushtarak, for example, the word mushtarak, when I didn't talk about that, are words that have 2 or 3 separate meanings. It's only one of these 3. It's one of these 3. You just tell me which one you need. Mujmal, no, is a term that is vague. It requires some degree of explanation. Explanation is to take something from the sphere of ambiguity, ishkal, to the sphere of clarity, which is, again, common sense, but you'll be surprised how uncommon common sense actually is. A definitive utterance, which is a nas, is what can only have one meaning. Some say it is a speech whose interpretation is its revelation. So nas is a part of clear indication. It's a word that's meaning is what it is. There's no other way. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. There is nothing else. There's no way. You don't need people to sit around linguistically and discuss this. It's nas. It means what it means. What it says in front of you. There's no way. There's no 2 ways to understand what's being said here. The word nas is etymologically derived from the bride's minassa. Minassat al-arus. So arus is a bride, and minassa is where she sits. So back in the day when they got married, the arus would sit like on a. So it was very clear. Everyone saw where she was sitting. So nas is taken from that. It's very clear. The meaning, everyone knows what this word means. It doesn't need a scholar of linguistics to explain it, because minassat al-arus, everyone knows where she's sitting. It's up there. It's in front of everyone. You're not going to lose sight of it. A probabilistic utterance or apparent speech of zahir is what accepts 2 meanings, one of which is likelier than the other. A probabilistic utterance may be figuratively interpreted when there is proof, and its meaning is then called apparent by virtue of evidence. So the word zahir, and this is for this definition, take it with a grain of salt, because it changed throughout history. But what it meant at that point was it's a word that had 2 meanings. One is more probable than the other, meaning this meaning is used more than the other. It could be literal and figurative. It could be just, no, these both meanings are literal, or both meanings are figurative, but one of them is just more probable than the other in general, meaning it's used linguistically more. So if you're going to choose the lesser known one over the more known one, you have to have evidence that makes that the case. You have to have a piece of evidence that says this is the meaning that's being used here, and that will be called a zahir bid-dali, meaning apparent by virtue of evidence. You had something that kind of sent you against what the most probable usage for this word is. All right. So that's that. So we're going to talk a little bit about af'al, and then actually we ran out of time, so we'll do that next time. So I'm going to go through af'al. Af'al meaning the actions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. It's quite. Let's just talk about this quickly, and then we'll read it next time. It'll take a minute. It's not that. So the words, the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, which is different, right? What he said, that's one thing. But what about what he did? A lot of the hadith, a lot of the tradition in the books of hadith is not really what he said. It's what he did, ﷺ. Things that he did. Either he performed an action, did not perform an action, physically walked away from an action, stood quietly while an action happened, objected to an action, right? Like these are all things all actions. We didn't actually say anything. No words were actually uttered from his mouth, alayhi salatu wasalam, but he did things. So what do those mean? What weight do those carry? Remember talking about evidence? So go back to the initial slides, and we said that there's different levels of evidence, right? There's the Quran, and what the Quran is clear upon, the nas, that's very clear, the literal. That is level A evidence. And then you have the Quran that maybe is figurative or it's not as clear. That's level B. Then you have hadith that is very clear. And hadith obviously with high degree of authenticity like mutawatir. That's level C. And then you have hadith that's not mutawatir but it's sahih and it's clear. That's level D. And then you have hadith that is not sahih but it's hasan, for example, but it's clear. That's level E. And they keep on going. Where do his actions fall in that? Are they evidence to begin with, or are they not evidence? And how do we put them? And this is a huge issue of interest and of importance. So let's talk about the different types of his actions. Alayhi salatu wasalam. Af'al jibiliya. Jibiliya means they're everyday actions. Stuff that you just, such as enjoying a certain type of poetry, dressing a certain type of fabric, loving certain foods. These are all natural. So he used to like dubba. Dubba is a type of zucchini or pumpkin. But funny enough, zucchinis and pumpkin come from the same family of plants. I can't remember what it's called. I'm too stupid. If you look it up, you can see what it is. There's a certain type it's a certain species of plants. And zucchinis and pumpkins and all these other types, they all look the same and taste the same. Cucumbers. It has the word cucumber somewhere in it. Someone looks it up, it's something like that. And all of them don't taste very good. Cucumbers are all right. Everything else is not too good. If Kus says all right, zucchinis in certain ways are okay. But the Prophet ﷺ apparently used to like one of these pumpkins type of food. He used to enjoy them. So whenever if there was a dish and it had all these different things in it, he would scoop up the pumpkin piece and eat it, right? So is that a sunnah? Should we be mandating people to grow pumpkins and eating pumpkins and forcing our children to have pumpkins? Well, I know somebody who used to force his kids to eat certain types of qara because that's what the Prophet used to eat. And he explained to him, like, yeah, Habib, let the kid eat whatever. Anyways, it's just this is an everyday action. It's not wrong for you to do them in your heart, hoping to do something he loved. Ibn Umar did this stuff. Ibn Umar, not only did he love, and Anas, not only did they eat pumpkins just because he did it, but they would, whenever he walked on a road, where he walked once before, they would try to walk exactly the way he did. And if he stopped somewhere, they would stop. And if he sat somewhere, they would sit. And that was just something that they found meaningful to themselves in terms of their connection with him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And you can't fault someone for wanting to do that. But to call it, this is Usool fiqh. This is the origins of jurisprudence. Here we're trying to determine what is obligatory, recommended, what is not. This is law. Legally, law-wise, no, this is not something recommended or required on any level at all. And it doesn't have any. These are everyday actions. He dressed in a certain way. He walked in a certain way. He ate certain things. He enjoyed certain things. He liked. It doesn't matter if you do these things or not. You can still love him and be close to him without having to live that lifestyle. And then there are specific to the Prophet, khassa, such as marrying more than 4 women. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ, there's more. Obviously, there was a clear reason for that throughout. They're all elderly and they're all part of different tribes, and those tribes were all united, which allowed Islam actually to exist to begin with, and it was empowering for them. They had not only did the women have religious immunity, they had political immunity, which has allowed Aisha to lead an army, which was never happened before in the history of the peninsula before this. It gave them immunity. So there's reasons for it, but it was specific to him, alayhi salam. We know that this is not something that we take for ourselves. And Imam Shafi'i, for example, sorry, there's a typo there. It's Shafi'i, there's no I. Took the narrative of Aisha touching the Prophet during prayer as something specific to the Prophet. In the Shafi'i madhab, remember, if you study Shafi'i with me, if your wife touches you after wudu, what happens? You have to go do your wudu again. And this is a weapon that your wife will use against you if you're a Shafi'i. You say a word and she'll poke you and have to make you do wudu again. So how does Imam Shafi'i explain that the Prophet ﷺ was praying once and Aisha touched his foot? He said that's specific to him. That's specific to, it's just like, it's specific. And he has his argument behind that. Obviously, we can't just use that anywhere, but that was his argument, and he has that part. For example, he didn't eat garlic and onion. And he explained why. Does that mean none of us are allowed to eat garlic and onion? No, of course, you can eat garlic and onion, it's not a problem. But understanding that certain things were specific to him, alayhi salatu wasalam, because Jibreel came to him and it had a horrible sense, and he didn't want to bother him with it. And then the actions that we care about, which are the tashri'i, the legislative actions, the actions that actually we want. What's specific to him is specific to him. I don't need to what is everyday jibilli, just natural. I don't need to know that either too much. But I need to know what is legislative, what is going to affect how we behave, and what's going to be a part of our law. So Qur'ani, the Prophet explained prayer, for example, something that has a Qur'ani background, something that doesn't have a Qur'anic background. There's legislative two things. Qur'anic background, meaning something the Qur'an said we should do, and then it did not explain in detail. Quran explained to us that you have to perform prayer. It did not explain to us that you have to stand first and make ruku a second and come back up again and then do your sujood and then sit again, and didn't do any of that stuff. It just told us you have to pray and gave us basic ideas. Then who taught it? It's his actions, alayhi salatu wasalam. It's people watching him pray. That's how we know how to pray, because he did it, and he did it for so long that people memorize how to do it, which is why we have it as a part of our deen. Zakah, Hajj, all these things he did. We watched people learn from him and did exactly what he did through his actions. Not Quranic. So how do we know what his action is? So if the Quran didn't talk about it, then how do I know that this action is actually legislative? That makes sense? Like if there's no evidence in the Quran that we're supposed to do it, then how do I know what this action is? That this action, because maybe it's specific, maybe it's natural, I don't know what it is. So that's where they kind of talk about. They say ma'ruf al-safa shar'iyya and ghayr ma'ruf. So actions that have no legislative nature, wearing the ihram in a specific manner. So meaning it would be within an act of worship, for example, would be in something that we know has a legislative nature to it based on context. I mean, the context there is explaining it. And then ghayr ma'ruf, something that we don't have, unknown legislative nature. In that case, we either call mandub, we either call it that it's a recommended, we just offer it a recommended nature. We can say ibaha is permissible if you want to do it or not, or tawaqquf, we just say we don't know, which is what the majority of what scholars did. We don't know what it is. We leave it as it is. You can make your decision on your own. But this is a huge area for historically for scholars to talk about. And you'll find these issues depending on, a lot of political parties play on this a little bit. By saying, well, what he did politically, how he built how he built the dawla, the Muslim nation, how he defended it, are those actions, those political choices, what are these? Are they legislative, or are they just normal actions? Meaning just seeing the context and making decisions based on scenario and context, or are they legislative? Meaning you have to do it every single time you build a nation, every time you try to defend it, you have to take 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. You have to do tawaqquf there because we don't have evidence. There's no Quranic evidence to say that this is legislative in nature. But it's a very wide topic. So we'll end with that, inshallah. That's af'al al-nabi. It's not very difficult. Next time we'll just recite the piece that exists in Arabic, so that we're going to have to figure out a way to make this more clear. This is like very unclear. I mean, look, who can read this? I can't read this. I know this thing, and I can't read it. And then we'll talk about abrogation next week, inshallah. Abrogation is we'll take a reasonable part, and then we'll kind of jog through the rest. We'll come to qiyas, we'll give it a little bit of part, and then we'll jog through the rest. And that way we'll recite the whole matan, but we'll focus on some pieces that have some degree of importance in them that require a little bit of comprehension that I think are important for a phase 1 or a level 1 study, inshallah. Just remember that there is I did put an assignment. Last week we didn't run, but I put an assignment. So please take some time. It's only 2 questions, they're not that difficult. So work on them and then submit them back, inshallah, if you're taking the course. And read the book. People are not reading the book. I don't know how I know, but I know people aren't reading the book. You're not reading the book. Read the book. It's mandatory reading. It's only like 70 pages. Yeah, you can read it. If you just put it on the nightstand beside you, and before you go to bed, just open and read 4 or 5 pages. It'll be done by the end of the semester. Read the book. It's not difficult. Actually, the translation by Musa Ferber is actually very good. Do people require like help in getting the book? Or are they struggling? If you need help to get the book, just reach out to me. We can figure something out. I think I have an extra copy at home to give you. But please read the book. It's a part of the mandatory reading. there will be a question from it, Yani. So if you don't read, you won't be happy if you didn't read it. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I don't mind. Anyone who studies what I'm teaching in Arabic only and wants the exam in Arabic only, I'll offer it to them in Arabic only. No problem. I have no problem with that. Yeah, it's fine for me. It's nice to read a little bit of Arabic every once in a while. If someone do. But the course is being taught in English, and it's being asked in English. No, I don't think this book, I didn't post it on the PDF. It's not a PDF. It's like another one. No, it's not the book. The book it's in the course material. I have the link. I have the link to go buy it. I don't have an actual PDF for it. The PDFs and the other course materials are other expansion, like other work from different scholars that some of them are translated, some of them are not. But the actual one to read, I have written under it mandatory reading, and it's a link to buy the book. And I think it's like $15 or something, or maybe more than that. I don't know. With inflation, it's probably more since we started this course. But that's it. You have a question? Okay. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.